Welcome back to the Standpoint Podcast. With me, as always, is my co-host Jordan Bohannon. Jordan, how you doing, man? Did you do anything fun yesterday?
Yeah, we had a pretty good dub last night. If anyone that tuned in, it's a lot of fun.
So we're recording this Wednesday morning after the win against UNC. Jordan, any just quick thoughts regarding the game?
Really wish we had fans last night. I think that would have been probably one of the most electric atmospheres ever that would take place in cover. But really fortunate we were playing last night and played against a really good UNC team.
I think the real question is that. So Jordan, you had 24, 7 made threes, right?
Yep, 7.
So is it time to enter your name in the National Player of the Year race, or no? Not yet.
We'll leave that to Luca for the Iowa
That's
team.
Luca.
Yeah,
All
we'll leave
right.
that to Luca.
Sounds good. Well, thank you guys again for listening. We really appreciate the support. Today we have a very special guest. I know we say that every week, but this is a very, very, very special guest. So, without further ado, we have a Duke legend, a Jeezy quoting, loving head of the bald committee, Jay Bilas. Thank you, Jay, for coming on today.
My pleasure, gentlemen. How you doing?
Doing well. We're doing well. Jordan, can you how did you know Jay Bilas? What is the connection there for the people?
Yeah, my brother Zach at Wisconsin has been in touch with Mr. Billis for a while now, and just my brother's always been really great with connections, and I thought it would be a great opportunity for us to interview Mr. Billis and see his thoughts on a lot of things because he's a really knowledgeable man, and I think it would be a really cool interview. So.
Well, Zach actually reached out to me to ask me if I wouldn't mind mentoring you a little bit because he feels like you shoot the ball too much and you need to throw it inside to your National Player of the Year candidate. But clearly, making 7 threes and 24 points, maybe Zach's wrong on this one.
Zach's wrong. Zach says a lot of things. He's wrong about a lot of things, but he's also right about a lot of things.
So let's get started with this, Jay. So what's your honest opinion on this Iowa basketball team? Don't hold back any opinions because we have Jordan here. He could take it. He's a tough guy. So what's your honest, raw opinion on the team so far?
Final Four, national championship good. With the experience level and having the kind of interior, well, inside outside superstar threat in Luka Garza, and then the skilled talent around him that can stretch the defense, and then all the changing defenses, the experience level, skill level. I don't see any reason why I was not one of the top contenders for the whole thing. And the one of the big challenges is going to be staying healthy throughout the year, not just through the COVID thing, but twisted ankles, knee, all this other stuff, staying healthy in the traditional sense and not getting too high or low, because I think this year in the Big Ten's the best league in the country, and I don't think it's a close call. And usually in a really good league, when you can play well and lose against the best teams. This year in the Big Ten, I think you can play very well and lose, and that's unusual. So I think the end result in certain games, especially on the road, fans or not, the road is still the road. You can't overreact to a loss. You kind of have to just shake it off and move on, kind of like an NFL team or something. When the Steelers are saying, "Look, you don't get extra money for being undefeated. We're out to win the Super Bowl. If we lose a game, so what?" I'm not saying it's not important, but once the game is over, you can't spend a lot of time beating yourself up over it.
How much has COVID, with everything that's gone on the past few months, we'll kind of just dive right into this. I listened to your announcement about being essential workers for college athletes last night on when you called the Duke Illinois game. What were your initial thoughts on? We can start with the football season. They weren't going to play for the Big Ten. They decided they want to play because everyone else pretty much decided to go against them. Kind of just give me the overall view of what your perspective was when college basketball came out and they kind of were only really worried about the NCAA tournament to begin with, and there hasn't been really any clear leadership after that.
Yeah, that's a good question, Jordan. I think the thing that has disappointed me most, one, let me start by saying these are really difficult issues and reasonable minds can differ. There are a lot of moving parts to this. And while this is we had a pandemic in 1918. None of us were alive for it, so it's unprecedented in our lifetimes, I would say. So you have to cut people a little bit of slack here. The thing that has disappointed me most has been that we have not had a national conversation within the college sports realm about what risk we're willing to take, on whom we're placing that risk, and then the changing circumstances that we're facing now. That football is a different sphere. It's an outdoor game. It's played at a different time of year. They're facing the same issues that basketball is now, but they're just doing it outdoors, and they're a lot further down the road. So they're going to go forward with fewer. In another week, the overwhelming majority of teams are going to be eliminated, and they're going to be done. And we're just going to have a precious few that are going to go forward and play the big money games, whether they're bowl games or the college football playoff. Basketball, as you know, is in a completely different sphere, where it's played at a different time of year, when we expected there to be a national surge in the virus, and it is all indoors. There's far more frequency of play, far more frequency of contact, and far more frequency of travel. So, but we haven't spoken about, not just can we play, because clearly we can, but should we? And should we be playing right now while we're having all of these problems all over the country? And what I said last night it wasn't like saying that we should shut down, we should pause, but we should certainly be talking about it on a national level, and especially among the administrators and the decision makers. And, you know, right now, you guys are essential workers. You are isolated. You're living in a bubble. You're tested constantly, at some schools daily. You're not allowed to go home for Thanksgiving. You're not allowed to go home for Christmas, because of the risk associated with contact with outsiders that would jeopardize your ability to continue to play and play for money. And look, making money is important. This is a big business. I'm not suggesting it's not important. The airline industry is important. The restaurant industry is, all this stuff's important. But college sports is an industry just like those. So there's a lot riding on this. But we need to talk about this and be clear about it. Is it better to pause this for a while, and let you guys go home, and then have a normal holiday under a very stressful time. Like, this is stressful on you guys. You don't know whether you're going to be playing. You're preparing for a game. You don't know whether the game's going to go off even after you get to your destination. You don't know. I get tested a lot, not as much as you, but when I'm waiting for those test results, I'm on pins and needles too. I mean, it's an odd feeling, and you guys are getting tested more than any medical worker in your community. And that's a question that our administrators need to answer too. Is this appropriate relative to what's going on in our communities across the country? And I just think having that discussion is a good thing to do, and we haven't had it. And that's been a failing of the NCAA.
Do you think that the circumstances, like you mentioned, with the testing, the essential workers, the isolation, like you've been bringing up, and all in part to, generate this revenue, do you think it furthers the discussion that these college basketball players are not necessarily amateurs anymore, and that they, NIL rights and, gaining money in that respect has a little more justification now with everything going on, and just showing how essential they are?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what it really does is ends the discussion. Frankly, there's no reasonable discussion to be had that college football and college basketball players aren't professional. You're a professional in every way. And so, what I find kind of interesting is all the contradictions, and others might call it hypocrisy, but I choose contradiction so as not to inflame things before we have the discussion. But what makes me laugh is when you bring up the issue of should we play through the pandemic, and given the change in circumstances we've had in the last month or so, immediately people say, well, the players want to play. The players want to play, as if that's dispositive of the issue. And you say, hey, wait a minute. Well, first of all, if there was lightning in the area, you wouldn't take a poll of the players and say, do you want to play? You'd say, get off the field until it's safe. And I think that analogy holds with regard to the pandemic. But oddly enough, with name, image, and likeness rights and compensation rights, economic rights for athletes. Nobody says, well, they want to get paid. The players want to get paid. That's what they want. Nobody cares what you want then. They only care what you want when it comports with their feelings about the enterprise. So they want this to go forward, and they're using the fact that you want to play as a justification for doing this. And look, I'm sorry, like we can do this. I want to work. I benefit from this as much as anybody. It's great. But money and education and money in sports and money and all this other stuff are not mutually exclusive. We can do both, and or we can do all these different things. And but the idea that some administrators are putting forward is, well, we're doing all this because these kids, they keep infantilizing you by calling you kids. These kids deserve they want to play. They deserve the right to play. They're not doing this because you deserve it. They're doing this because of the money associated with it, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a craven thing. Let's just be honest about it.
I think the funny thing about it all is the Big Ten announced, and we play Christmas Day now. And when was the last time a Big Ten conference game was held, other than I can think of the Hawaii tournament, was being played over Christmas Day? That's how bad they don't want us to go out and see our families. And the same thing, Thanksgiving, we play on Thanksgiving Day. Everyone's that I've talked to in our Big Ten conference is saying, they don't want us to go outside our bubble, that they call it. And I think it's funny when you look at our schedule, we're not playing on Christmas Day. And that just shows how much of essential that we are for entertainment for the outside world.
Yeah. And it's funny, like, so we're still dealing with those issues of the fact that, you are essential workers in this multi-billion-dollar industry. And it sounds like, you're that I'm talking about exploitation, all these things. You are exploited by the definition of the word. I mean, you're being asked to work for no pay while everyone else is getting fair market value. That's the definition of exploitation. And the ones that are getting paid the most are the ones making the rules. But they're not even changing the rules for you right now to make things easier. So over the Christmas holiday, like you're talking about, they are essentially making you stay so that you can't see your families. And it's not punishment. It's just they've got to have the business go forward. But yet they're still keeping you under these ridiculous rules that they have, where you have to have 3 days with no contact with the coaches over that period. And that makes no sense. So you're isolated, and then you can't have contact with the people you're working with. That's so stupid. And we need to be a little more. We need to have a little more nimble movement to get things done during this, because this is a battle right now. We're battling an issue that we haven't seen before, and we have to be able to move a lot quicker than we're moving.
We had Marcus Page on, as Jordan mentioned last week, and we mentioned a name, image, and likeness, and basically it creates a conversation regarding that it gives other schools a different advantage. Dukes have a better advantage to get the star player over than you and I, or something like that. But when we talked about it, Marcus goes, you'd have to be really ignorant not to believe that it's already happening right now. So this level of competition and this disproportionalism that you might see is already happening. So why do you think that people are so against the name, image, and likeness, maybe even more the NCAA, when there's already this unfair advantage happening? Is it because they don't want to unmask this current thing that's happening behind the scenes, or what do you think is the reason?
I think there are a variety of things that are making administrators feel uncomfortable. One, it's always been this way, and they don't want to see a change because this works for them. They don't want to hear the fact that, well, wait a minute, you're spending billions of dollars on facilities and all these other things to attract players. What difference does it make if they can get commercials and that's a factor in their decision making? Not every quarterback is going to flock to Alabama because the quarterback gets more commercials there. That's not the way the world works. If you went by the NCAA's theories on economics, if they actually were true, then all the best coaches would be coaching at the University of Michigan, because they have so much money. So you'd have Coach K, Roy Williams, Tom Izzo, John Calipari, and Bill Self, and I could name a whole bunch of coaches, Fran McCaffrey. You could have them all coaching on that staff, and they'd all, because they could pay more. They don't need to be or want to be head coaches. They just go where there's the most money. Money's a factor in people's decisions, but it's not the only factor. And to Marcus's point, there's not a level playing field now with the economics of the business. And I don't know whether he meant this or not, but if you think that the best players aren't getting paid now, you're also fooling yourself, because there's money changing hands now. And the FBI investigation exposed a couple of instances, but it's widespread. And it's going on in football and basketball and other things. It was happening when I was in school. There has not been a Final Four played in the last 50 years where all the best players were eligible. There's not one. There's not one banner that is hanging where everybody was eligible. It's just not. Somebody's taken something somewhere that violated some of these stupid amateurism rules, and the NCAA knows it. And yet we're carrying on this charade where every other student gets to make whatever they want, and every other person gets to make whatever they can, and the athlete is living under this amateurism myth, and made to be a criminal if you get an extra scoop of ice cream in your milkshake at the local ice cream joint.
I want to hear your thoughts on, you touched on unleveling playing field. Talk about, so our protocol is for the Big Ten. We get tested daily. We get the antigen test every morning. So people from the outside probably don't know this, but I actually tested positive antigen. I've already had the virus, but I tested positive again because we have to get retested after 90 days. I think CDC is 150 now, which shows the inconsistencies already with the Big Ten with the testing protocol. But I tested positive with my antigen. And, those 3 to 4 hours was hectic for me because of the game of our Southern game when we played 2 games ago. So I had to wait to get a PCR test to make sure that was a false positive, which it was. Thank God.
The antigen test, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's the spit test, right?
It's like half an inch up your nose. So
okay.
Yeah. But so I had to wait to get a PCR test. I know I get the PCR test results. I had to miss shoot around. And I was eligible for the game that night because the PCR test was false. I want to hear your thoughts on the inconsistencies amongst the conferences, because I believe ACC, if you get the virus, you're out for 14 days or 10 to 14 days. Big Ten is 21 days. It kind of creates that unbalanced playing field, like you talk about with the recruiting advantages. The same thing going on with the virus, how there's no universal rule amongst the conferences. So what are your thoughts on that, and how will that impact the season going forward for all the teams?
Yeah, that's I don't look at that, Jordan, as being a level playing field issue. That's more a health issue to me. And maybe I haven't examined it as well or the same way as you have. But for me, the lack of coordination among the conferences, especially the Power Five conferences and the Big East, if you want to put them in there, the top 6, that's been a problem, and that's where the NCAA has fallen down. Frankly, the schools that have the most resources should be coordinated in the way they do things, so that you can rely upon when you're playing in your Big Ten ACC Challenge game. That my opponent has gone through the same protocols we have. And, Michigan State went through it. They got to Charlottesville, and Virginia doesn't have the same protocols that the Big Ten has. And so all of a sudden they're there, they got to go home. There's no game. And I know that's frustrating, and maybe there are good reasons for it here or there, but not having the same protocols. You understand why the lower resource conferences and lower resource schools don't have the same, because maybe they can't afford it.
Right.
But the big conferences can afford it. And that's why a lot of the Big Ten coaches wanted conference only games, to start after the holiday, so that you could have a season. That you're playing a team or teams that are going through the exact same protocols you are. Everything's reliable. I do want to cut everybody a lot of slack on this. This is difficult. So you're going to have some mistakes, and we're going to have some speed bumps, and nobody's criticizing anybody for that. And there have been some positive things done, both by the NCAA and the conferences. But there's been a lack of coordination. There's been a lack of cooperation. And there's been a lack of, frankly, transparency. One of the things that bothered me the most early on in this, when we were going through the summer, was the idea that these, and it was when the Big Ten football and Pac-12 football basically said, we're not going to play. They weren't sharing information with the public. So you've got, all these institutions of higher learning, I think, have a duty to their communities to educate the public on the pandemic, on the consequences of getting the virus, the players, of community spread, of all the different things. The fact you are testing basketball players and football players every day, but not your healthcare workers on your campus. That needs to be discussed. And is that the right thing? And do we approve of that as a community? That's what I'm more worried about right now. Is are we hashing these things out, and we're not just listening to some people who are saying, hey, this is my entertainment, shut up, I don't want to hear about this. Okay, well, you can turn the volume down. I mean, it's just something we need to discuss before we go forward, and I think that's just a smart way to go about it.
Yeah, it's a good point you brought up too, because even when we bring it up on the episode, and even Twitter goes nuts, and they're paying for your education, they're paying for your scholarship, like you're getting all these benefits over the average person. Isn't that good enough for you? What is your response? Let's just say they're talking to you. What's your response to those people on Twitter saying that?
Well, first of all, a lot of that I dismiss because it's so ridiculously unreasonable. So usually what I do is I respond to what's reasonable, and I consider what's reasonable if it differs with my point of view. But if it's unreasonable, I usually just dismiss it. But if I do want to engage with someone with that sort of unreasonable crap, what I'll say is, to whom else do you say such a thing? Like, to whom else do you say, look what you get, shut the F up?
Mm-hmm.
The truth is, they don't say that to anybody. And, when I hear this, you get a scholarship business, you are getting paid. First question I ask is, well, non-athletes get scholarships too. So you have non-athletes, maybe musicians or student journalists or English majors or science, a biology major, they get full scholarships and stipends. So are they paid? Are they limited in what they can earn or accept as a result of the fact that they're getting a quote unquote free education? What work are they doing to earn that free education? They're just getting an educational opportunity. You're getting a scholarship to go to the University of Iowa. That's wonderful. Nobody's complaining about that. But the questions being asked is, why are you being limited to only that when literally no other person is being limited other than an athlete? It doesn't make any sense. Like, Jordan, you're not a better player, better person, better athlete, better student by virtue of your amateurism. You gain nothing from being an amateur. And this BS about love of the game and money are not mutually exclusive. Like, Fran McCaffrey loves the game every bit as much as you do, and his love for the game has not been diminished by the fact that he's highly paid. Same thing with Coach K and me and anybody else. Like, our love for what we do and the game itself is not diminished by amateurism. Amateurism is just an antiquated notion, and it comes from old England, also ancient Greece, all that stuff. And all it was were the elites, the moneyed elites, did not want to compete against the common man. And the way that they could shut the common man out was to say, no money for this. You can't have, you have to play for the love of the game. They couldn't afford to play for the love of the game. So you had the same lame, rich athletes winning all the time because the best athletes that didn't have the money couldn't play. They couldn't afford to play. And that's what was brought into the NCAA. It was brought through the Ivy Leagues, where these handlebarred, mustachioed white men wanted gentlemen playing against gentlemen. And that's where it came from. And it's all phony, and it's never been real. And we continue to carry it forward because other people get to line their pockets by virtue of the athletes staying quote unquote amateur, and they've never been amateur.
You bring up just a segue in this, Jordan. So we had Alan Lazard on, a receiver, played for Iowa State's on the Packers now, and we talked about the amateurism and comparing to the normal athlete. And you said, or normal student, and you're saying that this person Jimmy can get a scholarship for biology, and Jordan can get a scholarship, and what are they doing to work for it? And the one thing that's so funny is that he even brought up, and Jordan's even brought up on campus, one other situation are you going to be in a math class, and see a person wearing your jersey, and all these the bookshops and all these apparel stores and stuff just making tons of money off of your jersey, and yeah, they get away with it because they don't put the last name on it, but so like, how do you even justify that? And how can you even say that we're going to sell millions of dollars worth of merchandise, but you're just playing because you love the game, you deserve none of it?
You can't. And I've never heard anybody justify it effectively. So at first, it was just they pointed the NCAA and all the member institutions, all the ADs and presidents and all that stuff, pointed toward amateurism. They just said, well, they're amateurs. And it's circular logic. Why aren't they paid? Well, it's because they're amateurs. Yeah, but why are they amateurs? Well, it's because they're unpaid. It's like saying, well, why is that guy in prison? Well, because he's a prisoner. Well, why is he a prisoner? Well, he's a prisoner because he's in prison. I mean, it's circular. So, but then after we started getting into the name, image, and likeness stuff, and the fact that we're spending all this money, making all this money, and all that, now it's gotten into, well, that could be a problem for recruiting. And that could be, then we've got an unlevel playing field, as if Northern Iowa and the University of Iowa or Iowa State are on the same playing field. They're not. They're just not. And the truth is, Northern Iowa or Wichita State would absolutely have a better opportunity to get better players if they could pay them, because they could pay more as their best prospect for Iowa's fourth or fifth best player. And that's the way the economics would work. You're not going to have all the best players go to one place. And similar to the discussion about, you're not going to have the four best quarterbacks go to Alabama, no matter how much they pay, because they're going to go, well, I want to play. Like, I need to show what I can do. I can win the Heisman Trophy somewhere else. The Heisman Trophy candidates aren't all from Alabama. That's not the way this stuff works. So my thing is basically, nobody that consumes college sports or works in it is complaining or turning off the product based upon how much money is being generated, how much money is being paid to coaches, how much money is being spent in facilities. That doesn't bother anybody. But yet we're trying to tell people that the consumers will turn away if the players get paid. Like, no, they won't. No, they won't. That's absurd. They don't turn away when they're in fancy locker rooms and flying private to games. And when I played, we flew commercial. We were after we played on the road, we stayed in some crappy hotel, and we went to the airport at dark 30 and got on a crappy commercial flight. And and everything's changed, and nobody's complaining. They don't care. People don't care. They just want their games. And they won't care when the player, and it's going to be when they won't care when the players get paid.
So let's shift to the legislation that's been put out by a lot of these states now. You're seeing, I think California was the first one. I think Florida will be the first one that might be intact into the law based off their bill. Talk about how that will have a huge impact on NCAA, because that's putting a lot of pressure on them, and they're doing everything they can to lobby against these bills and take out all these wordings in these bills to make sure that they have a fighting chance to try to stop this and keep everything an amateur sport like they want it to do. So I want to hear your perspective on these laws that are being passed throughout these states, and where do you think it will take off from here?
Well, the NCAA will never do anything voluntarily that will put money in your pocket. They're not going to do it because they feel like the money that goes into your pocket is taken out of theirs. So while a year ago or so, after California, pushed its law forward, and Senator Nancy Skinner did all her great work in this, the NCAA came out and said, we've got this task force, and Gene Smith and Val Ackerman are chairing it. We're going to roll this train down the tracks on name, image, and likeness. I mean, the first thing I said was, they're saying they're going to do this, but they're not going to do it.
I haven't heard anything about it.
They're not going to do it. They're working on it, but they're not working on anything of any substance, because it's so restrictive as to not, it's not worth anything. So, like, you would not be able to have a contract with or do a deal with a university, somebody that the university has a contract with. So you couldn't do a commercial for Nike. And then you also couldn't do a commercial for a product that was competitive with a contract that the university had. So you couldn't do a deal with Under Armour. If they have the official, I don't know what the official hamburger of the University of Iowa is, but you couldn't go out and do a commercial for a competitor. You can't use the university mark, even if the university agrees to it. But you can but you have to wear the apparel. So you can't use the mark, but you have to wear the apparel. It just doesn't. The whole thing is so restrictive as to be useless. So what do I think is going to happen? I think the NCAA is going to continue to lobby Congress. One, they want an antitrust exemption, which would be the federal blessing of continuing to violate federal antitrust law, which I don't think the NCAA is going to get. And then they're also going to lobby for federal legislation that would essentially preempt all these state laws, because the NCAA is saying, and I think Emmert came out and said it yesterday at this Sports Business Journal summit, that absent federal legislation, we can't even make any rules, because it's an uneven landscape. And you're like, wait a minute, there are different state laws with regard to every aspect of this business. That's like saying, well, all these different states have different tax laws. Some of the states have no state income tax, and others do. And that's not fair. How can we hire coaches on a level playing field if in Florida, you coach at the University of Florida, you pay zero income tax, and you coach in New York and your income tax is through the roof? That's not fair. They're not saying we can't have any rules now. It's only on the athlete where everything has to be the same, or the whole house of cards comes tumbling. It's so stupid. It's so dumb. And nobody believes it except those that are already saying, quit messing with this. I want my games when I want them. You remember when conference realignment was going on?
Yep.
Nobody cared about conference realignment. They only cared about, well, wait a minute, I want my games. Keep everything the same. I want Oklahoma and Nebraska. So Nebraska should stay. They didn't care about, people are still consuming it the same way they did when the Pac-12 expanded and teams left the Big 12, teams left the Big East, and the ACC expanded. You see anybody? The ratings are just as high as they've ever been. If not, they've been higher before the pandemic. So none of that stuff's true. It's all BS. So to get back to your original question, after I meandered all over the place, I don't think we're going to see the NCAA do anything before Congress does anything, and Congress isn't going to do anything for quite a while. So they're going to kick the can down the road, and the longer they do that, the longer they go without NIL legislation, the more billions they get to pocket without it being deferred, without any of it going into your pocket. And that's really the goal, is let's stall this as long as we can, and then we'll give as little as we can going forward.
You brought up sponsorships, like you said. The school could have a deal with Nike, can't do commercial for Under Armour and things like that. Jordan, can you talk to Jay or explain the story of March Madness, I think 2 years ago, with the goldfish, and just basically puts it on a pedestal to show how absurd it is?
Yeah, so we played Cincinnati first round, primetime CBS game. I think we're a noon start game. Get done. We have to go through our media processes, as you know. Going to our locker room, and they have these big bags of gifts and stuff that is marketed like body armor, goldfish, and some other foods. So supposedly the goldfish isn't Nabisco or whoever is the company that runs goldfish, that makes goldfish, isn't sponsored by the NCAA, which was in the basket they give us. So Our Matt Whitesell, our SID, comes to me and says, you have to do your press conference, get ready. So I get ready. I bring my goldfish because I'm starving. I played 38 minutes and go to the press conference. I'm getting up, starting to walk on the stage, and I have my body armor drink in my right hand. And there's a NCAA official that sprints out to me and he takes my goldfish away. He's like, you can't have those up there. And I'm like, why not? He's like, you just can't have those up there. So he took them, threw them away, kept my body armor drink though. And so that was that. So I thought that was a prime example of the how we are billboards for this multi-billion-dollar industry.
That's the word. That's funny you say that. That's the word I use. You're unpaid billboards. And like, look, there's nothing sinister about sponsorships and making money and wearing apparel of a certain apparel manufacturer. I mean, but that, Jordan, that's been going on forever. When I was in college, we played in the Final Four my senior year, and before the championship game, you have a press conference where they have all 5 starters up on the dais, and you're going through that thing. And my mom had sent me like a polo shirt, and so I was wearing that, and instead of my Duke University issued Adidas gear. And so I went to get up on the podium, and they told me, you have to cover up that your polo shirt. And I said, why? My mom just sent it to me. And they're like, well, you can't have that logo up there. I'm like, well, what would you have done if I had this on underneath and unzipped my jacket? Like, would you have run up there? And then I finally gave up. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This is so stupid. But it wasn't even close to what you're dealing with now. I don't ever remember kind of the official drink, like somebody taking a drink away from you, or like I'm an old man now, so I drink coffee a lot more. And so I went into an NCAA tournament game, and I had a Starbucks cup with me, and you would have thought I brought a gun into the building. And you're like, will you guys relax? Like, what is the problem here? It wasn't for a game. It was for the practices, like day before for the practices. And look, I get it. Contracts say what they say. I'm a lawyer. I understand how this stuff works, but it just shows like even more contradictions and how ridiculous this thing gets.
I think the biggest issue is that partly the reason why I want to start this podcast, because, me and Jordan became friends a couple of years ago, and I had asked him questions and, travel and daily regimens and, before pregame, postgame stuff. And I just realized, obviously, what you see on the screen, what you see on the TV, what you see online, like you just have this example. So you see these Iowa basketball players, they play, they get a free scholarship, they go home, they have the life, right? But you don't see all the things that happen behind the scenes, right? And what lead up to it. So I think that we wanted to start this because the perspective of the athlete's never shown, right? All you see is what the NCAA thinks and the normal fan thinks, because you see it on Twitter, which is just an echo chamber of the same opinion. So I think that the biggest issue is that the fans don't hear the players' opinions like we do now. It's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get a more better conversation. All they hear is the NCAA's opinion. So I think that whoever down the line, the fans and the NCAA and the administration started just believing the same things, and they kind of left the player, to the side. Do you think this has always been the case where people just believe what the NCAA is saying because, like, okay, they're the governing power and they must be right, and these are just college kids, or do you think that's been the way the whole time?
I think it's been the way the whole time, and I'll ignore your use of the words "more better." But but like your point about the podcast, like you guys are using this podcast to have intelligent conversations and to explore these issues. But what if you just wanted to have a fun podcast with guests on and talk about your favorite rom-coms and rank the best burgers and all that stuff, and people could see Jordan's unmade bed in the background. And the thing took off and became this money-making big deal, where you had sponsorships, and all of a sudden it turns into a web TV show, and then NBC picks it up or something. Would that be so horrible if you guys made a bunch of money doing this? I mean, do people really think that oh my God, that's going to take time away from their studies, and Jordan should be putting up extra 3-pointers for the good old Hawkeyes? What's the harm in this when any other student could do this and it could take off? Like, in the marketplace, this is not going to be successful and do well just based upon the fact Jordan had 24 points last night. It's got to be great content, and it's got to succeed on its own. And what are we so afraid of? If and I'm not worried about an Iowa player doing a commercial in Iowa City and making money off of it. And I can't tell you how many coaches I've heard say, "Well, what happens when Luka Garza gets all the endorsements, and then there are fights in the locker room?" Like, what are there fights in the locker room over playing time? Like, he takes the most shots. You think Jordan's taking a swing at him in the locker room because of that? It's just so stupid.
Who knows?
Like, that doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. And if any team's having a problem over that, they're having problems anyway. So I just can't imagine these ridiculous arguments that we're having over money when everybody else is making anything they can and nobody argues about it.
It's funny you mentioned that because the making money and things like that. But so like we've had people come up to us. We've had business calls with people and, entertain things like that. And, it's so funny because everyone's like, forgets the NCAA is so strict. And we had an interview with this company and, we have a legal team, we have the best people. Like, we'll get into it. We'll find a loophole. No big deal. And then a week later, they message us and they're like, "Hey guys, we really appreciate your time. We couldn't find a loophole. Like, we'll keep in contact." And it's like, yeah, what do you think was going to happen? And it's funny, like you said, because you go on the basketball court, you practice your ass off and you work on all these things. It's kind of the same thing with what we're doing here with the podcast, right? You're doing all these things behind the scenes and doing all this extra legwork, but, we can't benefit off of it. And it kind of reminds me of, playing college basketball like Jordan does. You go into the sweat and 2 hip surgeries he's had. He didn't have 2 hip surgeries because he went to math class and fell or something. It's with basketball.
Right.
And it's like all of these things are, basically the result of what we're doing. And it's just funny because even now at the podcast, like I even see it, maybe not the full extent, but what Jordan sees, like he's going out there, blood, sweat, and tears. Luka's losing teeth. And you go home like, here's a Subway sandwich. Thanks for coming out. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah. And they'll tell you it's a voluntary activity.
Yeah.
As if the people who are getting paid are being handcuffed to their desks. Like, that's voluntary too. I hate to break this to you. Like, your job is all this is voluntary. The difference is you're under a restriction that makes you look like a criminal if you violate a rule. And all these rules have been violated. Like, look, I don't mind telling you this because it's true. Like, nobody when I played was eligible. Nobody was. And very few people are eligible now. I don't want to say nobody because then I'm forcing you guys into a bad spot. But the truth is nobody's eligible now. Somebody's taken something somewhere, got a sandwich somewhere, a discount or something like that somebody would say, well, like when I was in college, my girlfriend, who's now my wife, we used to go to dinner and there weren't a bunch of restaurants in Durham. And every once in a while, the owner of the place would comp our meal. What was I supposed to do? Like, wrestle the guy to the ground and make him take my money?
Yeah.
And so does that mean I was ineligible, or the other guys on the team did the same thing, were ineligible? And if people don't think those things happen and that's not normal human interaction, it needs to be stamped out and eradicated. That's just dumb. It's just dumb.
So my brother would kill me if I didn't ask this, and I want to have you talk about being a dad with your son that played at Wake Forest, and your experiences with watching him grow up throughout college and playing against Wake Forest and playing at Duke. I believe it was his senior year, correct? And almost upsetting them at where you used to play. Talk about that experience of being a dad and watching him grow up and the moments that you've cherished throughout him growing up and being the man he is today.
Well, thanks for asking. It was really fun. Both my wife and I have 2 kids. We have a 26-year-old daughter and a 24-year-old son. And my boy took to basketball right away and was a big sports fan. So that was fun. And it was fun to watch him. I really enjoyed watching him play. It was a little bit of a challenge because, he's got to play and then he's, his dad's this bloviating gas bag that's on TV all the time, and he's got to listen to all that crap. But he had a really good sense of humor about it, which was fun.
The 94 feet was one of the funniest things I've ever seen on TV.
That's nice of you. That was all him. But in high school, we would always kind of joke about. I could, all right, man. Well, like, what did you hear from the crowd that was funny? And he'd always go, "Oh man, they were all over me about you," and stuff like that. And then like when he would go to Duke, so my wife and I went to Duke. That's where we met. And then our daughter wound up going there. She wanted to go to Stanford. She wound up getting into Duke, and she went there. And so when my boy was warming up before the Duke game, the crowd starts chanting at him, "Your dad went to Duke. Your mom went to Duke. Your sister went to Duke. You couldn't get in." And and he's like, "That was pretty good. Like you got to give him some credit on that one. They were all over me." But then watching him play was, especially in college where, I knew how difficult being a walk-on was. And, like the two hardest jobs in basketball, I think, are walk-on and manager. And so he went through all that stuff and he never complained. He was captain of the team his senior year and worked his ass off and he loved it. And I really enjoyed watching him. I wish I could have gotten to more games, but and then the fact that he wanted to stay in basketball after that, he's working for the NBA office now in New York, working on that junior NBA program. It's been fun. It's been fun seeing your boy. He's not a boy anymore; he's a man. But watching your son, work, enjoy something you enjoyed without you pushing him into it. That was kind of fun.
Yeah, I always think about this. So, Jordan's dad played football at Iowa and all four brothers played basketball. And I just think of, is he the happiest man in the world? Or so disappointed that the odds of one of them would not pick up a football and say, "Hey, Dad, can we go to the field?" Like, it's just so funny looking at that and how life works out. And it's like you're saying, it's incredible because he can want to play soccer, football, whatever, but he's chose basketball. And I think that's really cool.
It shows the intelligence level of the Bohannon boys that they chose not to play a sadistic ground acquisition game that's a crypto fascist metaphor for war.
You're selling my mom.
So a lot of this podcast, what we talked about, we've dispelled the student athlete. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up. Jordan brings it up. The student athlete's not real. It's a college athlete. Jay, I think I know your opinion, but do you agree?
Yeah, student athlete is a made-up term that the NCAA brought up. They made up a gentleman named Walter Byers, who was the executive director of the NCAA. And I was on an NCAA committee when I was in college. So I was behind the scenes seeing all this stuff. They made it up because they didn't want to have to pay workers' compensation claims. And similar to what you hear now with this idea, when they say collegiate model, the hell does that mean? Collegiate model doesn't mean anything because the model's the same as any other professional business. That just means we don't allow pay to our revenue drivers, the athletes. But they make these terms up so that they can, it gets into the lexicon. And now even I use the term student athlete from time to time because it's inescapable. But when I was in college, the way I looked at it was, I pushed back on at the NCAA tournament press conferences. Man, they are religious about, you can't refer to these guys as players when you're being interviewed. You have to say any questions for the student athletes. All right, questions for the coach and the student athlete. The student athletes will depart and go back to the locker room because they're student athletes. And you're like, look, I'm a player when I'm playing. I'm a student when I'm in class. Like I found it condescending. I would find it condescending to be referred to as a student athlete in class. What does my athleticism or lack thereof have to do with anything when I'm in class? Nothing. That doesn't define me in any way. And similarly, when I'm playing, who cares whether I'm a student or not? Like, student means one thing. It means you're enrolled. It doesn't mean a level of commitment. And like when the NCAA says, well, there's students who just happen to be athletes and they're students first, athletes second. Like, who else has to say what they are first? Like, now, am I a husband and father first, or am I a broadcaster first, or am I a lawyer first? I'm so confused. Like, the duality of man has been thrown out the window. I have to choose.
Yeah.
It's just so dumb.
And I think that the whole point of this is breaking down these preconceived notions. And I'm sure, Jay, you've probably seen it, at the forefront, talking to these players. You see them on TV, you hear things about them, but you really get to know them and understand who they are as a person. It really broadens the picture and lets you understand them better and the student athlete better. One question I have for you is that, so we had Marcus Page on, obviously a UNC grad, talked about some Duke players back then. Do you think the Duke bad guy is a myth, or when you enroll at Duke, is it something that you kind of put the costume on and you kind of know what you're getting into?
Oh no, we're all assholes. Yeah.
That's the clip. Thank you.
Of course it's a myth. Like the best thing about like the Duke Carolina rivalry is Duke and Carolina recruit the same players. So if when the Duke fans hate a Carolina player, that player was usually pretty close to having chosen Duke, and vice versa. There are a lot of there are a lot of Duke players that almost went to Carolina, and so the Duke players that Carolina fans hate almost went to Carolina, and so if the situation was reversed, they would love the guy in the Duke uniform if they played at Carolina, and the Duke fans would love the Carolina player if they played for Duke. So it's kind of irrational in that way. And the players are all great. Like both, I don't know anybody that doesn't like Roy Williams that knows him. I don't know anybody that knows Coach K that doesn't like him. I'm fine with wanting, like, that's fandom, is wanting the other guy to lose. You want your team to win and the other guy to lose. That's cool. But this idea about the most hated Duke player and all that stuff, it's taken on this mythic quality to it. And to their credit, the guys who, like, I wasn't good enough to be hated. I was they Carolina fans loved me because if I was on the floor, that meant they were probably going to win. But like whether it's JJ Redick or Leitner or all that, Steve Wojciechowski, most of them have come to like kind of embrace it a little bit and have fun with it, and it's been kind of a healthy fun. But I don't think it was pleasant to go through. Like I remember JJ Redick talking about, he's getting a bagel in the morning, and the guy, the server that's giving him his bagel was a Carolina fan and gave him a hard time. Well, and he's like, dude, I'm just trying to get a bagel. Can I get a bagel? Is that okay? And after a while, you could see where guys would lose it every once in a while. But I don't care at my age. Like I get a lot of it. But a lot of times people come up and they'll say, well, I hate Duke, but I don't hate you. And I'm like, is that a compliment? Or I think that's a compliment.
It's a backhanded compliment.
You just deal with it. It's no big deal. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, I think that, in my opinion, I think you were the most likable Duke player just because, so much of the history of people. And I think that, you're the realist. And, what made you get into that mindset? Because you could have been almost, kind of like a sheep, like the rest of them, and just said, like, whatever happened, and not really think outside the box. What led you? Were you always like that, where you wanted to challenge authority, or, what led you to that point to speak out for the athlete rights like you have been?
Yeah, that evolved, I think, because when I was in college, I think I mentioned I was on the NCAA long range planning committee. I was one of two athlete representatives on the committee, so I learned a lot about the process, and I did not care for the way the policy was made or the policies themselves. But I sort of understood that, look, I'm a part of this process, so once there are decisions made, I may not agree, but I can't go out there as a member of this committee and bash the decisions of the committee. I have to be supportive of it. And then when I became a broadcaster, I was already a lawyer, so I felt like I had a pretty good understanding of the way systems worked. But I was kind of hesitant to comment on policy because, well, my job's talk about basketball. But then I realized, well, wait a minute, I'm talking about officiating, I'm talking about coaches, and I'm talking about the rules of the game and all these other things. Like, why am I avoiding, in the right context, why am I avoiding these things? Is it because I don't want to rock the boat? And then I just decided that, you know what, if I'm getting paid for my opinions, I should share my opinions as long as they're reasoned and reasonable and I can back them up. And if I have a policy difference with the NCAA, if their policy is so good, they should be able to justify it. And one thing I'll give myself a little bit of credit for is I stress test my opinions. Like, I want to hear the opposing side. I want to argue with somebody about it, because the argument either um, solidifies my position, helps me solidify it, or it helps me view it in a different way and maybe changes my position. That's why I refer to it as stress testing. Um, it's never been about people. I don't just say, well, the NCAA is bad people. They're not bad people. They're great people. Now, do I criticize the leadership of a couple of folks in positions of authority there? Yes, I do. But generally, it's not about people, it's about policy. And as long as you keep it there, that's fine. And the criticism I have of certain leaders, I think, has been reasoned and proven right. Now, if somebody wants to come out, I haven't heard a lot of people come out and disagree with that. So if they want to, the floor is theirs.
Before we wrap it up here, I just want to say that I'm rooting for you to be the next president for the NCAA. So I'll be the biggest campaign manager for you when that takes place. I hope it does. But I think I really appreciate your leadership with the college basketball realm, because you're someone that has helped me kind of be an advocate for college athletes and kind of shape the way for, what I want to find my passion in. And obviously I have other passions, but this has been huge for me to be able to, have my opinion be out there. And like you said, kind of debate with people about, just the better off that college athletes can be if, there's a little bit of policy change. So I thank you for kind of being that leader for me and, shifting my focus to something that I'm really passionate in.
Well, Jordan, that's nice of you to say, but I'll tell you this, like, you guys that are currently in the trenches and going through this are the heroes in this. I don't think most people understand that it takes an extraordinary amount of guts and courage to speak up when you're in the middle of it. It's a lot easier for me to do it because I'm not a player anymore. I mean, you have skin in the game, and decisions are being made on your future right now and on your present. That's not my situation, so it's a lot easier for me. And I will tell you this: I'm not advocating that you or anyone else do anything more or less or the same. But I do look back on when I was your age. That why did I stand by and not say what I was thinking at the time? It was a different time, but that's not an excuse. And so many of you guys, whether it's on issues of social justice, NCAA policy, all that stuff, voting, criminal justice reform, you name it, have inspired me beyond belief. So all the credit goes to all of you, not anybody else.
Jordan brought up a good point. I mean, the first thing when we started this is, when we had the podcast, it was going to be a little raw, a little more behind the scenes. I'm like, are you okay with people hearing what your opinion? Because, you don't really get the opportunity to. And Jordan, right away was like, yeah, like, I have a freedom of speech. I'm able to talk about what I want. I know the lines we could toe. But it's funny because even his like assistant coaches or other coaches came up to him and, were like, you sure you want to do this? Like, this is, it's a big deal. And there's a lot of, obviously it doesn't affect you. It's the team. I was ranked for the first time, a lot of media attention. So what you say now is going to have more effect than if a point guard at Wichita State had a podcast. So it's a lot of more different on a national scale. And then it's funny because yesterday at UNC, he said one of the UNC coaches came up and talked about the podcast and talked about how he listened to the Marcus Page interview. And then that just like makes it so much better. And it just kind of shows you that you don't need to be scared all the time. And there's always going to be these people telling you, these doubters saying, it's against the rules. Like, be careful. Like, I wouldn't do that. But like when you kind of see like the fruits of your labor and like the things, it's so like rewarding. And I think it's like you're saying, it's like so important to sometimes challenge the status quo. Like you said, like have a good argument, obviously, because, you don't want to sound dumb, but that's a really good lesson, even for any person. If you have something you believe in, go to battle for
it. And to me, the station that you're in, as far as being in college, these colleges and universities are supposed to be marketplaces of ideas. So why would anybody say that you shouldn't speak out and have these discussions? that's what college is supposed to be about. What a university setting is supposed to be about. It is about that marketplace of ideas and having differing views and hashing them out and reaching maybe even a shared conclusion, or at least like the idea of like I said, stress testing your views. So look, we all have constraints that we have to be somewhat mindful of. But at the same time, I don't want to live my life in fear of what someone will think of my opinion. And I go back to what I said before. I really do try to live this way. Is I consider every reasonable point of view, and if somebody disagrees with me or has criticism of me, like criticism, I accept compliments freely. I better be able to accept criticism. If it's unreasonable, I dismiss it, and that's worked pretty well for me. Maybe I should just dismiss all criticism. That sounds like a better way of doing things. I accept all compliments. Criticism is not welcome.
I have a final question. It's a little bit of a three-part, a little bit of rapid. So my first question is, who's going to win the Big Ten, Jay?
Iowa. Yeah, no
Iowa.
question.
Okay. And then who's the second best
Especially when
team?
you can count on 24 a game and 7 threes from George Bohannon.
Okay. Do you think the biggest competition to Iowa is Illinois?
Yeah, although Michigan State, I'd say Illinois, Michigan State, and then I don't discount how good Wisconsin is. Like I said this, people took it as a joke, but Wisconsin reminds me of a bunch of former European pros playing at the Y at lunch and kicking your ass because they all know how to play. They might not have any NBA players on their team, but they got a ton of European pros, and I played in Europe. It's not so bad.
My second question is, what's the best game you ever broadcasted? I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, there were a few. The one that everybody remembers first was that Syracuse-UConn 6 overtime game in the Big East tournament. But I think as far as a game, the quality of play, what was on the line, and the atmosphere and everything was in 2005. I worked with Dick Enberg in the NCAA tournament on the Arizona-Illinois Elite Eight game with D. Brown and Darren Williams, Luther Head, all that. Illinois was number one in the country, and I think they'd only lost like one or two times. And they were down to Arizona, and the game was essentially over. And they made this comeback to get it into overtime, wound up winning the game. And it was unbelievable. I mean, that was probably the coolest game I'd ever broadcast, all things considered, except for halftime. It was at the Rosemont Horizon, and they only had one media bathroom. So I had to run up into the concourse and stand in line to use the facilities with all the Illinois and Arizona fans. And they're looking at me going, "What the hell are you doing here?" I go, "Hey, man, you got to go. You got to go.
It's a humbling experience.
Got to go. You got to go."
And my last and final question, which is the same thing. So what is the biggest
my last
lesson?
and final question, which is more better than the ones I've asked before.
Jay, I'll tell you what, I never was so great at English on the ACT, all right? Which is interesting for me being a podcaster, but we'll let that go. So my final question is, what's the biggest lesson you learned while playing? And what's the biggest lesson you learn now as a broadcaster and viewing it from your point of view?
Are you talking about like X and O's wise or just period?
I would just say your perspective and outlook on college basketball.
I think the biggest lesson I learned when I was playing was, I was like most kind of decent players out of high school. Like I was a really highly ranked high school player, and I thought I was really good, man. The more work I put in, the better I got. I never played in high school against anybody I didn't think I was better than. And then I got to college, and then you started playing against guys like Michael Jordan and Ralph Sampson and Len Bias, and I'm going, you know what? I can practice as much as I want to. I'll never be as good as those guys. And the realization that I have limits. Like I have real limits, and some of these guys are limitless. Was pretty stark. So the fact that the idea that when somebody wrote down all men are created equal, when I got to college and played against Jordan and Bias and Sampson and all those guys, all men are created equal is total bullshit. What I've learned as a broadcaster is that I think, I've always known that words are powerful and words have meaning, and objectivity is important. Like fair is not difficult. And so when I do a Duke Carolina game or something like that, look, everybody went to college somewhere, but people are so invested in the outcome, they assume when something is said that sort of violates their point of view, that there's bias in it. And there's really not. Like after all these years, I don't care who wins. I really don't. So if I'm doing the Iowa Michigan State game this year, and I know you guys, and I've known Fran McCaffrey for a long time, and I've known Tom Izzo for a long time. I have so many relationships and like all these people. I really don't care who wins. I'm happy for the winner. I feel for the loser, but I go to so many games. Like if people think we're invested in who wins and loses, we're not. I see 100 games a year and then watch all these games on Synergy and all that stuff. I don't have the energy to root for teams. All I'm rooting for when I go to a game are two or three things. I'm rooting for a close, compelling game. I'm rooting for something decent to eat at halftime. and then not a ton of traffic and an open bar at the hotel. That's all I'm really referring to.
You're a simple man, Jay. And then the last question I have, it just came to me. You've announced so many games. I'm in so many places. What's the best stadium arena that you've announced at?
Probably Allen Fieldhouse at Kansas.
Allen?
Before we started this, I was telling Jordan while you were away. I'm not sure where you were. But I almost went to the University of Iowa. I got recruited by Lute Olson really hard. So I visited Iowa, and the last day of my visit there, I had breakfast at Coach Olson's house. His wife, Bobby, had made like pancakes or something. And on the kitchen table was his 10-year contract and the plans for the Carver Hawkeye Arena.
Wow.
That's how long ago it was.
Wow.
I was a senior in high school, and the Carver Hawkeye Arena had not been built yet. They were still playing in the Fieldhouse. Wow. And so, I've been in Carver Hawkeye, I've been in the old Fieldhouse, and both those places are fantastic. But if I had to have only one place I could see a game, I would choose Allen Fieldhouse.
Well, Jay, we really appreciate you coming on. You had a lot of great insight, a lot of things that, were really important to talk about. And, we got got more educated on a lot of these issues and things that, we only see our perspective from it. We only see what we could see online on Twitter, but you're really ingrained it, or you're really in everything. You're in the trenches in that sense. So all the information you shared is really amazing. And, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. I know you're a very busy man. I think you mentioned that you're announcing a game tonight, and you just announced the Duke Illinois game. So thank you again, though, for your time, Mr. Bilas. We really appreciate it.
No, it's and please call me Jay, and give me a call later on, and we'll talk about improving your Zoom backgrounds. That'll really help the podcast.
Name, image, and likeness would help me profit off a better background.
Well, thank you, everyone, for listening. This wraps up the episode of The Standpoint. Make sure to keep subscribing, 5-star reviews. Leave those good reviews on Apple Podcasts as well. We really appreciate having Jay on. It was a huge guest. We kind of stumbled into this one, but we hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys next week.